Removing and replacing parts. Omen 35L Gaming Desktop PC GT16 0000i. Tools you need. How to replace the glass access panel. No tools are required to remove or install this assembly. Removal. Loosen the black security screws on the back of the workstation. Grip the raised metal handle on the glass access panel and gently pull back and away from the workstation. Remove the panel by lifting it up and out of the workstation. Replacement. Line up the glass access panel with the guides on the bottom and top of the workstation. Slide the panel forward until it is seated. Tighten the black security screws at the back of the workstation. How to replace the opaque access panel. No tools are required to remove or install this assembly. Removal. Loosen the black security screws on the back of the workstation. Grip the raised metal handle and gently pull it away from the workstation and remove. Replacement. Line the access panel up with the guides on the top and bottom of the workstation. Slide the panel forward until it clicks. Tighten the black security screws at the back of the workstation. How to replace the front bezel. No tools are required to remove or install this assembly. Note: ensure the workstation is upright. Removal. Place your fingers under the bottom of the front bezel to find the latch. Gently pull it forward and remove. Replacement. Line the front bezel up with the front of the workstation. Gently press the top clasps into the corresponding openings until they click. How to replace the front fan filter. No tools are required to remove or install this assembly. Before you begin, remove the front bezel. Caution: to avoid damage to the screen, put pressure on the latch from above. Do not pull. Removal. On the top of the front fan filter, press on the release tab. Gently pull it forward to remove. Replacement. Line up the bottom of the front fan filter with the ports on the front of the computer. Gently press down on the release tab until it snaps into place. How to replace the front fans. Tools for the task. Before you begin, remove the opaque access panel, glass access panel, front bezel, and black fan screen. Removal. Following the two cables from the top fan and noting their orientation for replacement, disconnect one from the lighting daughter board and one from the system board. With both cables unrouted, remove the two Phillips head screws in the top fan. Gently remove the fan and cable. The bottom fan is removed in the same manner. Replacement. Route the bottom fan cable through the opening near the upper right corner of the chassis fan location and place the bottom fan into position. Replace the two Phillips head screws in the top left and bottom right corners. Noting the orientation from removal, connect the cables to the lighting daughter board and system board. The top fan is replaced in the same manner. Note: ensure cabling is secured and free from being pinched between the chassis and access panels. How to replace the top I/O module. Tools for the task. Before you begin, remove the glass access panel, opaque access panel, and cable management hood. Removal. Disconnect the USB, power, audio, power switch, and power LED cables from the system board. Remove the cables from the clips on the chassis. Unroute the cabling, making note of their orientation for replacement. Remove the three Phillips head screws that secure the top I/O module to the chassis. Depress the two hooks to release the top I/O module from the chassis. Pull the top I/O module away from the chassis making sure to guide the cabling through the cutout in the chassis. Remove the top I/O module. Replacement. Guide the cabling through the cutout in the chassis. Align the top I/O module with the hooks on the chassis and press to click into place. Replace the 3 Phillips head screws that secure the top I/O module to the chassis. Noting their orientation from removal, route the cabling. Connect the USB, power, audio, power switch, and power LED cables to the system board. Replace the cables into the clips on the chassis. How to replace the hard drive. Tools for the task. Before you begin, remove the glass access panel and opaque access panel. Removal. Disconnect the hard drive power and data cables behind the opaque access panel. Locate the hard drive at the bottom of the chassis. Press the black release tabs on the hard drive carrier. Pull the hard drive carrier to remove it. On a flat surface, separate the hard drive carrier pins from the hard drive. Remove the hard drive from the carrier. Replacement. Place the hard drive inside the carrier by gently flexing the release tabs of the carrier, slotting the pins into the holes on the sides of the hard drive. Insert the hard drive carrier into the drive bracket. Connect the power and data cables to the hard drive behind the opaque access panel. How to replace the system memory, DIMMs. No tools are required to remove or install this assembly. Before you begin, remove the glass access panel. Note, it is recommended to populate memory slots 1 and 3. This video shows slots 2 and 4 populated, but the steps are the same. Removal. With the computer on its side, press the upper DIMM release latch to the open position. Note, the lower tabs are stationary and do not move. Grasp the memory by the edges and gently pull up to unseat from the system board and remove. The other DIMMs are removed in the same manner. Replacement. Align the notch in the DIMM with the DIMM slot key on the system board. Gently press the memory down into the slot until it clicks. The other DIMMs are replaced in the same manner. How to replace the power supply. Tools for the task. Before you begin, remove the glass access panel. Note, this video shows a modular power supply. Some configurations may have a non-modular power supply, which requires disconnecting and unrouting the power supply cables from the system. Removal. Make note of all cables connected to the power supply. Disconnect all cables attached to the power supply. Remove the 4 Phillips head screws that secure the power supply to the chassis. Note the orientation of the power supply for later replacement. Remove the power supply. Replacement. Noting the orientation from removal, place the power supply inside the chassis. Replace the 4 Phillips head screws that secure the power supply to the chassis. Noting their orientation from removal, reconnect all the cables to the power supply. How to replace the graphics card. Tools for the task. Before you begin, remove the glass access panel. Note, this video shows a 2-slot graphics card. Computers using a 3-slot graphics may look different, but the procedures will be similar. Removal. Disconnect the cables connected to the graphics card. Loosen, but do not remove, the Phillips head screw on the video card support clasp. Remove the 4 Phillips head screws securing the graphics card support brace to the chassis and remove. Remove the 2 Phillips head screws that secure the card to the chassis. Press the black push tab on the motherboard to release the graphics card. and gently pull out to remove. Replacement. Align the graphics card with the slot on the motherboard and press the graphics card in until it clicks. Replace the two Phillips head screws that secure the graphics card to the chassis. Place the graphics card support brace into position and tighten the four Phillips head screws that secure it to the chassis. Slide the support clasp into place, ensuring both sides are flush with the graphics card, and tighten the Phillips head screw. Plug the cables into the graphics card. How to replace the back panel fan. Tools for the task. Before you begin, remove the glass access panel and opaque access panel. Removal. Disconnect the fan cable from the lighting daughter board. Noting its orientation for replacement, unroute as needed. Disconnect the fan cable from the system board. Noting its orientation for replacement, unroute as needed. While holding the fan in place, remove the four Phillips head screws that secure the fan to the chassis. Remove the fan. Replacement. Place and hold the fan into position on the chassis and replace the four Phillips head screws. Noting the orientation from removal, route the cables through the access port on the chassis. And secure the cables through the cable management. Connect the fan cable to the lighting daughter board. Connect the fan cable to the system board. How to replace the cable management hood. Tools for the task. Before you begin, remove the glass access panel. Removal. Remove the two Phillips head screws that secure the cable management hood to the chassis. Noting its orientation for replacement, remove the cable management hood. Replacement. Noting the orientation from removal, replace the cable management hood. Replace the two Phillips head screws that secure the cable management hood to the chassis. How to replace the liquid cooling system. Tools for the task. Before you begin, remove the glass access panel, opaque access panel, and cable management hood. Note, if the spare part pack looks different from the one currently installed, the supporting kit on and behind the system board must also be replaced. Refer to the hardware reference guide on support web for more information. Removal. Unplug the cooling unit from the system board. Make note of all cables connected to the lighting daughter board under the opaque access panel. Disconnect the cooling unit and the fans from the lighting daughter board under the opaque access panel. Unscrew the four round Phillips head fasteners that secure the heatsink to the motherboard. Note, due to the adhesive quality of the thermal grease located between the heatsink and processor components, it may be necessary to move the heatsink from side to side to detach it from the motherboard. Unscrew the two Phillips head screws on the top fastening plate. Under the opaque access panel, remove the two Phillips head screws at the top of the workstation beside the black release knobs. Slide the fan cooling system support plate to the left. Gently remove the plate with the cooling system attached. Unroute as needed. Remove the 8 Phillips head screws from the support plate to detach the cooling unit. Replacement. Attach the cooling unit to the support plate using 8 Phillips head screws. Noting the orientation from removal, route the cables through the access port on the chassis. Slide the support plate into the top of the workstation. Shift it to the right. Secure the support plate with 2 Phillips head screws on the fastening plate and 2 more screws under the opaque access panel beside the release knobs. Note, before replacing the heat sink or processor, the thermal grease should be replaced. The thermal grease should be replaced every time the heat sink and processor are separated. Use alcohol and a soft cloth or an alcohol swab to clean all thermal grease from the heat sink and processor. Use the thermal grease applicator to apply the thermal grease to the processor. Reseat the heat sink on the system board. Secure with the 4-round Phillips head fasteners. Connect the cable to the system board. Noting the orientation from removal, connect the cables to the lighting daughter board. Note: ensure cabling is secured and free from being pinched between the chassis and access panels. How to replace the liquid cooling fans. Tools for the task. Before you begin, remove the glass access panel, opaque access panel, and liquid cooling system. Removal. Remove the 4 Phillips head screws securing the fan to the radiator. Noting its orientation for replacement, remove the fan. The other fan is removed in the same manner. Replacement. Noting its orientation from removal, place the fan into position on top of the radiator. Replace the 4 Phillips head screws securing the fan to the radiator. The other fan is replaced in the same manner. How to replace the processor. Tools for the task. Before you begin, remove the glass access panel, opaque access panel, cable management hood, and liquid cooling system. Note: the computer must be placed on its side on a flat surface to perform this procedure. Removal. Press in and to the side to release and lift the tension arm for the processor bracket. Lift the processor bracket open. Caution: do not touch the processor or socket contacts. Touching the processor or socket contacts could damage the processor or motherboard. Noting its orientation for replacement, carefully remove the processor. Replacement. Caution: do not touch the processor or socket contacts. Touching the processor or socket contacts could damage the processor or motherboard. Noting its orientation from removal, grasp the processor by the edges and carefully lower the processor onto the socket. Lower the socket bracket. Secure the tension arm into the bracket locking mechanism. How to replace the M.2 solid-state drive. Tools for the task. Before you begin, remove the glass access panel and graphics card. Note: the configuration shown does not have a heatsink installed. If the M.2 SSD has a heatsink installed, the heatsink should also be removed and replaced. Removal. Remove the Phillips head screw securing the M.2 SSD to the system board. Grasp the M.2 SSD by the edges and remove. Replacement. Align the notch in the M.2 SSD with the notch on the system board and insert into its slot on the system board. Replace the Phillips head screw that secures the M.2 SSD to the system board. How to replace the RTC battery. Tools for the task. Before you begin, remove the glass access panel and graphics card. Removal. Gently press the 2 clasps on the RTC battery socket lid together and lift the lid up to remove. Noting the orientation for replacement, use a non-metallic, flat-bladed tool to press the silver release latch to loosen the RTC battery and remove. Replacement. Noting the orientation from removal, place the RTC battery into its socket. Press to secure the battery in place. Replace the RTC battery socket lid and press the lid down until it clicks into place. How to replace the wireless LAN card. Tools for the task. Before you begin, remove the glass access panel and graphics card. Removal. Carefully remove the plastic cover from the wireless LAN card. Caution: use care when disconnecting the wireless LAN cables. Any damage to the cables or connectors can degrade performance. Noting their orientation for replacement, use a pair of needle nose pliers or tweezers and disconnect the cables connected to the wireless LAN card. Remove the Phillips head screw securing the wireless LAN card to the system board and allow it to release to the spring tension position. Grasp the wireless LAN card by the edges and remove. Replacement. Align the notch in the wireless LAN card with the notch on the system board. At an angle, insert the wireless LAN card into the slot on the system board. Replace the Phillips head screw that secures the wireless LAN card to the system board. Caution: use care when connecting the wireless LAN cables. Any damage to the cables or connectors can degrade performance. Noting their orientation from removal, use a pair of needle nose pliers or tweezers to connect the cables to the wireless LAN card. Replace the plastic cover. How to replace the wireless antennas. Tools for the task. Before you begin, remove the glass access panel, opaque access panel, and graphics card. Removal. Caution: use care when handling the wireless antennas. Damaged cables or connectors can degrade performance. Remove the plastic cover from the wireless LAN card. Carefully disconnect the wireless antenna cables from the wireless LAN card. Unroute the wireless antenna cables from the routing channel on the chassis. Remove the Phillips head screw that secures the right wireless antenna cover to the chassis. Rotate the right wireless antenna cover and remove. Carefully peel the right wireless antenna away from the adhesive that adheres it to the chassis. Guide the right wireless antenna cable through the hole in the chassis and remove. Noting the reusable strips that adhere it to the chassis for replacement. Remove the left wireless antenna in the same manner. Replacement. Caution: use care when handling the wireless antennas. Damaged cables or connectors can degrade performance. Carefully guide the left wireless antenna cable through the hole in the chassis. Align the guide pin on the left wireless antenna with the hole in the chassis and adhere it into place. Align the hooks on the left wireless antenna cover with the slots in the chassis and rotate the cover closed. Replace the Phillips head screw that secures the left wireless antenna cover to the chassis. Noting the reusable strips from removal, route the left wireless antenna cable through the chassis. The right wireless antenna cable is replaced in the same manner. Noting the orientation from removal, route the cables through the routing channel on the chassis. Carefully connect the wireless antenna cables to the wireless LAN card. Replace the plastic cover. How to replace the system board. Tools for the task. Before you begin, remove the glass access panel, opaque access panel, solid-state drive, graphics card, fan cooling system, and memory. Removal. Remove all cables, cards, and drives attached to the system board. Unscrew the 8 Phillips head screws that secure the system board to the chassis. Grasping the system board by the edges, carefully slide the system board out of the cutouts in the chassis and lift to remove. Replacement. Grasping the system board by the edges, lower the system board, towing the external connectors into the cutouts in the chassis. Note: ensure there are no cables pinched between the system board and chassis. Replace the 8 Phillips head screws that secure the system board to the chassis. Replace any cables, cards, and drives to the system board. How to replace the lighting daughter board. Tools for the task. Before you begin, remove the opaque access panel. Removal. Caution: use care when disconnecting cables from the lighting daughter board. The connector pins can be easily bent and damaged. Noting their orientation for replacement, disconnect all cables connected to the lighting daughter board. Remove the 2 Phillips head screws that secure the lighting daughter board to the chassis. Remove the lighting daughter board. Replacement. Place the lighting daughter board into position in the chassis. Replace the 2 Phillips head screws that secure the lighting daughter board to the chassis. Noting their orientation from removal, connect all cables to the lighting daughter board.